People who are Protestants can also be Christians. Being a Protestant and a Christian is like being a Floridian and wanting to be a Canadian. If you really want to be a Canadian, then being a Floridian is going to get in the way of that. If you really want to be a Christian, then being a Protestant is going to get in the way of that. In this series, we'll be looking at how Protestants are distorting the Word of God that is found in the Bible. I'm a Bible-believing Christian, and our Protestant for the day is Mr. James White of Alpha and Omega Ministries. This is Christian versus Protestant on John 6:44. All right, so James White says this.
Verse 44, no one is able to come to me unless the Father, the one who sent me, draws him, and I will raise him on the last day. Those are Jesus' words.
Yes, they are. Those are Jesus' words.
How few believe Jesus' words today?
Actually, the majority of Christians believe Jesus' words right there. And to be clear, this is Christian versus Protestant, but even people who qualify as Protestants end up on the Christian side of this argument. And that's because a lot of Protestant beliefs are Christian beliefs. So please don't assume that Mr. White is speaking for all Protestants here. He's only actually speaking for a subset of Protestants. Now again, Mr. White said how few believe Jesus' words today. But that's not true. What few Christians believe is Mr. White's edited version of Jesus' words. Let's watch and find out what I mean by that.
Who can come to Christ? Only him who's drawn by the Father.
That's correct. That is taught in John 6:44. The verse clearly lets us know that only a person who is drawn by the Father can come to him. So no argument there. What Mr. White just said is a very Christian teaching. That's not the Protestant in Mr. White, that's the Christian in him. He continues.
Who's drawn by the Father? Those who are given by the Father the Son.
That's correct too. That is another very Christian teaching which is being taught by Mr. White. He hasn't let his Protestantism creep in yet. But there is something very important that I need to point out about that teaching. Because Mr. White is about to go off the rails and I don't want Christians to follow him. So the question that Mr. White just asked is who is drawn by the Father? He then correctly answered that question with those who are given by the Father to the Son. Now that's not taught in verse 44, but if you go up to verse 37, you can read that Jesus said, all that the Father gives me will come to me. So what Mr. White is doing there is he's putting those two teachings together, which is completely fine. So in verse 37, we learn that the Father gives Jesus people, and all that the Father gives him will come to him. And in verse 44, we find out that all those people who come to him can't do so unless they were drawn by him. So at least three things are happening here. God draws people, God gives people to Jesus, and all of those people who were given to Jesus come to Jesus. At no point in there does it say that all the drawn people will come to Jesus. It says all the people who were given to Jesus will come to Jesus. This is where Mr. White makes his mistake. I'm going to draw a card. Okay? I've drawn the card. Now I'm going to give it to you. These are going to be your cards. Now I'm going to draw another card. I'm also going to give that one to you. You're welcome. I'm going to draw another card. Give it to you, draw another card, give that one to you, draw another card. I'm gonna put that over there. I'm gonna draw this one, I'm gonna throw it over there. I'm gonna draw this one, I'm gonna put it down there. I'm gonna draw this, that's not yours either. I'm gonna draw this one, I'm gonna give that one to you. That's yours, that's a Queen of Diamonds, that's a good one. All right? I'm gonna draw another card, not yours, drawing another card, not yours. So here are the cards that I've given to you, and here plus there, all over the ground are all the cards that I've drawn. These cards here, these ones that were given to you, these are the ones that are going to come to you. Because as the verse says, all that the Father gives me will come to me. So you're Jesus in this metaphor and I'm God. What huge egos we have. But anyway, these are the cards that are coming to you. These ones all over the floor here, who knows what's happening to them. So just to be clear, Mr. White does have the true Christian teaching here.
Who's drawn by the Father? Those who are given by the Father the Son.
That's correct, but that's not the end of the teaching. The full answer to the question of who is drawn by the Father is those who are given by the Father to the Son, as well as anyone who is drawn by the Father and was not given by the Father to the Son. So Mr. White is just representing this teaching right here, but he's not telling people about this teaching right here where people can be drawn but not given to the Son. So now's the part where Mr. White says goodbye to Christianity and just cranks that Protestantism up.
Every person drawn by the Father is raised up on the last day.
That is not taught in the Bible. Mr. White teaches that. The Bible does not. So let's go back to the verse. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. That's what the verse says. James White is then changing the verse and making it say something completely different. James is saying this.
Every person drawn by the Father is raised up on the last day.
What James is basically doing is he's taking the no one can come to me part and he's changing that to everyone has to come to me, and then he's taking the unless part and he's changing that to if. And then he leaves the last portion the same. James is making it say everyone has to come to me if the Father who sent me draws him. And James White has been doing this verse editing for years. I am not the first Christian to point this out. A couple years ago, he was in a debate with Trent Horn, and James said this same exact nonsense about John 6:44.
John chapter 6 verse 44 says, "No one is able to come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I'll raise him up on the last day."
That's correct.
And in John 6:44, all those who are drawn are raised up by the Son.
That's not true.
None of that is in the single verse that James has quoted. At first, it doesn't say, "I will raise up all of them on the last day." It says, "I will raise him up on the last day." And it simply says, "No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him." There's nothing in here about some kind of irresistible drawing where the person has to go to Jesus. It certainly doesn't say the person will always remain with Jesus, or this drawing will keep the person from ever leaving Jesus in the future. That's being read into the text rather than being drawn from it.
Anyway, since I'm not under a time limit to talk like Trent was in the debate, hopefully I can explain this in a way that James White, or at least the people who are just blindly following James White, will be able to understand. And if you are blindly following him, don't worry if you fell for this. James is very confident in what he says. He is not always correct. He makes a lot of mistakes when reading the Bible. But Mr. White believes what he's saying. And if he doesn't, he does a really good job at making it seem like he actually believes the nonsense he's talking about. So back to the verse. "No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up on the last day." So this verse tells us at least two things. One, in order to come to Christ, you need to first be drawn by the Father. And two, if you come to Christ, he will raise you up on the last day. The part that Mr. White is teaching incorrectly here is part one. Part one is simply telling us what a prerequisite is for coming to Christ. So what is one thing that you need to do to come to Christ? You can't come to Christ unless God draws you. To write that as an equation, no one can X unless Y happens. So let's play with that equation. Let's make X equal, I don't know, stabbing a human to death with a knife. So what's a prerequisite for stabbing a human to death with a knife? We gotta hold the knife somehow. Maybe not with your hand, maybe you can hold it with your foot, or you can build a robot that holds it for you. You're still technically holding it. So we'll make Y equal holding a knife, or wielding a knife in some way. So let's plug that into the equation. So no one can stab a human to death with a knife unless they are holding a knife. So now a question for you. Have you ever held a knife? My guess is that everyone who's watching probably has. So to anyone who answered yes to that question, you have held a knife, if you were to take this verse and apply Mr. White's illogical way of reading verses to that verse, then here's what you find out. Everyone has stabbed a human being to death if they have held a knife. So if you take a page from the Mr. White School of Reading Comprehension, then if you held a knife, you're a murderer. Alright, now obviously Mr. White is misreading the verse. If you have held a knife in your life, that doesn't mean that you've stabbed somebody to death with a knife. But if you stabbed someone to death with a knife, then you did hold a knife. Likewise, if you are drawn by the Father, that doesn't mean that you have to come to Christ. But if you come to Christ, then you were drawn by the Father. And as we learned in verse 37, you were also given by the Father to the Son. But don't forget, being drawn by somebody doesn't mean that you're automatically going to be given. You can be drawn and then not given to the Son. The Bible does not rule out that possibility. So let us know in the comments, who has John 6:44 correct? Is it James White and his Protestant view?
Every person drawn by the Father is raised up on the last day.
Or is it the Christians who read that verse in a way that doesn't make all knife holders murderers? And remember, when I say his Protestant view, I just mean his Protestant view. There are plenty of Protestant Christians out there who line up exactly with Christianity on that issue. They do not side with Mr. White on that issue. Now to Mr. White, if you're watching, I'm not making fun of you. I think in many ways you are a great example of a Christian, but I also know that a lot of the things that you teach are not Christian at all. So please know, I am not making fun of you. I'm making fun of the ridiculous teaching that you've been teaching for years. It doesn't make any sense. What Mr. White is saying is not written in John 6:44. It's not taught anywhere in the Bible. So again to Mr. White, if you're watching, I'm guessing that you have held a knife in your life at some point. And I'm guessing that you know that you can't possibly stab somebody to death unless you've held a knife. So our question to you is, does John 6:44 really say this?
Every person drawn by the Father is raised up on the last day.
And if you are planning on sticking with that claim, are you also going to turn yourself in for murder? Please feel free to leave any comments below with any Bible verses that you've heard Protestants teach falsely about. Let us know where we can find this false teaching, whether it's a video on YouTube, a link to an article, a pamphlet that was left on your car. Wherever it is, let us know and we can check it out. If you enjoyed this video, please click that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel, making sure that you click that notification bell. That way you're alerted whenever new videos are uploaded. This is How to Be Christian, and if you want to know how to be Christian, lose the Protestantism, keep the Christianity. You have a great day. Psych! Woo! I'm out.